Hey folks, let us ease into tonight with something gentle laugh. So before we drift off though, if you're finding this little corner of calm cozy, feel free to hit that like button. Like and subscribe only if it feels right. Like no pressure. And hey, drop a comment, let me know where you just retuning in from and what time it is there. It's nice to picture you all scattered across the world, just settling in just like this. Now, let's set the mood. Dim those lights a little, maybe turn on a small fan for that soft, steady hum in the background. Oh, good. So tonight we were stepping into a workshop in 16th century Florence where a man with smudged fingers and a mind full of ideas is about to start something like that. So I'll outlast us all. It's a story about patience, about the slow, quiet magic of making something that lingers, just sort of laugh, just and it starts with a single brushstroke and a smile that would take years to catch. Ready, let laugh begin. It was a mild morning in Florence, 1503, when a man in a velvet doublet stepped into Vinci's workshop. The air smelled of linseed oil and damp canvas, with a hint of something like sharper. Like literally like vinegar, maybe from the jars of pigments lining the shelves. Limitash from a sketch of a flying machine. His fingers just smudged with charcoal and raised an eyebrow. He knew this man, Florentine merchant Francesco del Giocondo, a man with just enough coin to commission art but little patience for delay. Giocondo cleared his throat, adjusting the gold chain around his neck. I've heard you read the best, he said, his voice so tight with the kind of confidence that came from owning 3 wool workshop. My wife, Lisa, deserves a portrait laugh. Something like, sort of like, memorable. He paused, glancing at a half-finished painting of a saint propped against the wall, not like those stiff things the other painters do. You make people look like they she's thinking. Heino nodded slowly, already mentally cataloging the request. Portraits were lucrative, but they bored him. Laugh, so too much sitting still, too little room for experimentation. Yet something about Giocondo's urgency piqued his curiosity. When do you need it? Yeah, he asked, wiping his hands on a frayed linen cloth. Giocondo smiled as if he de-expected the question. Oh, by next spring. For our anniversary. Dealmate's lips twitched to string. That was barely a year. He spent 3 years. Underlaughed the Last Supper like a line and still fought it unfinished. I don't worked to deadlines, he said, turning back to his sketch, especially not for something that really mattered. Giocondo's smile faded. Yeah, I will pay double, he said. Yeah, triple if I must. Yoon less set down his charcoal laugh. He thought of the notebooks just piling up on his desk, like pages filled with anatomical drawings, designs for war machines, theories about the flow of rivers. He needed money to buy parchment, to hire models, to fund the experiments that kept him up at night. Triple he repeated. Oh, and no rushing. I paint when the lights are right, when the mood. Just... Giocondo grumbled but agreed as he left. Ast stared at the empty canvas, leaning in the corner, a portrait of a merchant, a wife, life, sort of like hardly Zecker, Mona Lisacker, yet just a blank space waiting for a store. He wandered to the window, watching a street vendor shout about ripe figs, and thought about Florence in 1503. The city was buzzing. So Michelangelo was working on Hersder. Like David Jurderbein just across the Urno, politicians bickered in the Palazzo Vecchio, and artists scrambled to outdo each other with frescoes and sculptures. It was a place where genius was both celebrated and scrutinized, where a single brushstroke could make or just break a reputation. John Ed already weathered his share of criticism. People called him a dreamer, a procrastinator, laugh, like Anka, someone who started a dozen projects and finished none. His book Adoration of the Magi sat in a monastery, half-painted while he chased ideas about bird flight. But this time maybe something felt different. Lisa del Giocondo wasn't a saint or a hero. She was a woman with a life, a story, a face that held secrets. Maybe that's why he agreed. Maybe he just wanted to prove that even just ordinary people could be extraordinary in paint. That afternoon, he visited Giocondo Zilla on the outskirts of Florence. Lisa was sitting in the garden, plucking petals from a rose, like when he arrived. She didn't tend or curtsy, just looked up with a gaze that was neither warm nor cold. Laugh, just sort of like uncurious. Mostly, my husband says, "You're gonna paint me," she said, her voice so low, he wants it to show how wealthy we are. The silk dress, the pearls. Les smiled. "I'll paint the dress if you like," he said. "Yeah, but I am more interested in sure you laugh, or the way your eyes crinkle when you laugh. The thoughts you have when no one should just watching." She raised an eyebrow, much like he had that morning. "Oh, you'll wait a long time for those," she said. He knew she was right, but as he walked back to his workshop, the sun dipping below the rooftops, so he felt a flicker of excitement. This wouldn't be just another portrait. It would be a puzzle, a riddle laugh, like just on something that made people lean in, squint, wonder. And if it took longer than a year, well, Giocondo had paid triple he could afford to wait. Back in his studio, he laid out a new canvas stretched tight over a wooden frame. He just mixed a base layer of brown paint, thin enough to let the canvas breathe, and just dipped his breath. For a moment he hesitated. What if he couldn't capture it? Laugh, that spark, that something that made Lisa del Giocondo more than just like a merchant's wife. Then he thought of all the other things he started and not finished. Laugh. So just like on the flying machines, the war elephants, the maps of imaginary cities, uncut, and smiled. Maybe this time he'd finish. Maybe this time it would be worth the wait. He made the first stroke, a soft curve that would become her shoulder. The paint dried slowly, as if savoring the moment. Outside, a bell tolled for like vespers. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, and in that quiet workshop with the smell of paint hanging in the air, the book Mona Lisa began like just laugh, just like bunker, not as a masterpiece, but as a promise to take time to notice, to make something that's lasted. The rumors started before Leonardo even mixed his first batch of flesh-toned paint.
"It's the Duchess of Milan," whispered apprentices, lingering just outside his workshop.
"No," said his mother, countered a bookseller who claimed to have seen sketches. "Foolishness," scoffed the baker, just wiping flour from her hand. "Everyone knows it," says the self-portrait in drag. Leonardo heard it all, and he didn't bother correcting anyone. Let them wonder. Oh, mystery, he decided. Was half the fun. Lisa del Giocondo, for her part, seemed amused by the speculation. She arrived at the workshop once a week, usually at dawn, when the light slanted through the east window just right, and settled into a carved wooden chair with the patience of someone who'd spent years managing a household of 6 children and a husband prone to fits of impatience. "They think I am just a ghost," she said. "Just one morning, watching Leonardo sharpen his brushes, just a figment of your imagination." He glanced up, smirking. Laugh. "Oh, would that make the painting easier? No need to pause when you stand to stretch or scold the servant." She laughed, uncut. Warm sound like he'd been trying to capture in paint for months. "You'd still find a way to delay. I've seen your notebooks, half sketches of clouds, half equations about water flow. When do you even sleep? Not enough," he admitted, which was true. He'd taken to napping in 2-hour bursts, convinced it made his mind sharper. It also meant he spent late nights staring at Lisa's preliminary sketches, wondering if he just got her nose quite so right. But here, said the thing no one talks about. Lisa wasn't his only model. There were days when he'd dismiss her early, then spend hours sketching like a fishmonger's wife from the market, her cheeks flushed from shouting over like price haggle, or a nun from the nearby convent, her smile tight with the kind of piety that felt like a secret. He even bribed a street urchin to sit still, promising her a handful of coins if she'd just stop fidgeting long enough for him to study how sunlight hit her cheekbones. Why all the others? Yeah, laugh. Lisa asked one afternoon, catching him tucking a sketch of an old woman with a wart into his notebook. He hesitated, then shrugged. Just sort of like complicated to your smile isn't just happy or sad, it's both. And something else. I need to study all kinds of smiles to get Jersey or Dara. She nodded, as if that made perfect sense. My mother used to say I was born with a question on my face, she said, like I knew something, like no one else did. Tan thought of that comment weeks later, when a nobleman from Venice visited the workshop. The man had heard about the portrait and demanded a peek, sneering when he saw how little progress had been made. A merchant's wife, yeah, he said, just wrinkling his nose, laughed. Why waste your talent on Tannen or Hanley G? Taro didn't answer, he just kept mixing paint, his fingers steady. But later, when the nobleman was gone, he added a tiny detail to Lisa's expression, laugh Anka, a flicker in her eyes, almost imperceptible, like sort of that said, "Him I am more than you think, G." There were other theories, of course. A scholar from the university argued the painting was of Leono's mother, Katerina, who just left him when he was a boy. Look at the eyes, he insisted, leaning too close to the canvas. They hold the same loneliness. Laugh, I'll let him ramble. He thought of his mother, too, while painting, just like Unkao she smelled of lavender. How her hands were always chapped from working the field. But Lisa Sa's hands were soft, with manicured nails and a ring that spelled out Giocondo in tiny diamonds. So different women, different lives, but something in their quiet strength overlapped. Then there was the idea that third Mona Lisa Garag laugh, sort of like G was a composite, like uncut, a little bit of Lisa, a little bit of the fishmonger's wife, a little bit of the nut. Sanada wouldn't confirm or deny that either. He liked the ambiguity. It made the painting feel alive, like it could shift depending on who was really looking. One evening, as the sun set, Lisa stood up from her chair and walked over to the canvas. She'd never asked to see it before, and Emma tensed, suddenly, self-conscious. Laugh. What if she hated it? What if he just got her all wrong? She stared at it for a long time, her head tilted. Laughed, then she turned to him and smiled, uncooked, not the one he was painting, but a real unguarded smile like you're making me look like I have secrets, she said. He let out a breath, laugh he didn't know he was holding. Oh, Dante. So she laughed again, and this time he didn't need to sketch it. He already knew exactly how to paint it. The canvas sat blank for 3 weeks, not entirely blank, laugh. There were faint charcoal lines, the ghost of an outline, a curve for a shoulder, a tilt of the head, the suggestion of a chair. But no paint asked. Emma would stand in front of it for hours, brush in hand, then put it down again, muttering about like the wrong light or like a misaligned eye socket. His apprentices started betting on when he, make the first real stroke. Young Sandro, the boldest of the bunch, wagered a loaf of bread that wouldn't happen before the next full moon. Dean Attica knew he was stalling. He always did this with new projects, laugh, just unpoked and prodded at them like a doctor examining a patient afraid to commit to a diagnosis. It's not that he didn't know what he wanted. He had sketches upon sketches. So Lisa from the front, Lisa in profile, Lisa with her head turned just so her left hand resting on her arm, her right laugh, so just uncut. Well, the right hand was proving tricky. Should it be relaxed, clenched, holding something, a flower, a prayer book? He'd each drawn her holding like a sprig of jasmine, then crossed it out too sweet. A scroll too formal, laugh in the end. He'd settled on letting it rest gently on her lap, like fingers slightly curled, like she just set something down and hadn't quite decided if she wanted to pick it up again. Deciding and doing were two very different things. One morning, he spent 2 hours mixing a shade of ochre, only to pour it back into the jar because it, looked like too much like autumn. Another afternoon, he convinced himself the canvas was warped, so he took it off the frame, sanded the edges, and re-stretched it, laughed sort of like uncut, while Lisa waited in her chair, embroidering a handkerchief and pretending not to notice. You know, she said, finally pricking her finger with a needle. My husband once spent a year debating whether to buy a vineyard. By the time he decided, someone else had just bought it. Now he drinks worse wine. Kind of grunted. He'd heard enough about Giocondo's business woes. This isn't he like a vineyard laugh. He said, wiping a smudge of charcoal off his cheek. It's impermanent. Once I put paint to canvas, I can just take it back. She raised an eyebrow. You mean those layers of glaze you keep going on about, the ones that let you build up like color, like sunlight through leaves? I thought that was the point, like letting the painting grow. Laugh. He paused. Laugh. She'd have been listening. He shouldn't have been surprised. Like Uncle, Lisa had a way of absorbing things, tucking them away like treasures. She'd asked about his experiments with oil paints, like how they dried slower than temper, giving him time to blend colors right on the canvas. She'd inquired about the math behind perspective, why objects looked smaller when they were farther away, and nodded seriously when he rambled about vanishing points. Most people's eyes glazed over. Not just her. All right, he said, setting down his brush. Yeah, sit up a little. Not too much, like you listening to a secret. She adjusted her posture, her expression softening into something that wasn't quite a smile, but wasn't neutral either.
Oh, perfect.
He dipped his brush into burnt sienna, thinned with linseed oil, and leaned toward the canvas for a heartbeat. He froze. Laugh. What if this was the wrong shade? Like, what if the brushstroke was too heavy? Like, what if, Lisa sighed very softly, not impatiently, just reminding him in that quiet way of hers that whole time was passing. He made the stroke. A thin line following the curve of her collarbone, soft enough that it almost disappeared into the canvas. Wasn't it perfect? It wasn't even close. But it was like a start. The rest of the morning passed in fits and starts. He'd paint a little, then step back, squint, mutter, and paint over it. He worked on the background first, laugh just on the vague shape of a landscape, just like on top because it felt safer. Trees, hills, a winding road. Nothing specific, just enough to set the stage. By noon, his apprentices were sneaking glances, trying to see progress. Sandro looked so disappointed. The full moon was still days away. Leonardo ignored them. He was too busy staring at the way the sienna line interacted with the canvas, just how the light caught the edges of the brushstroke. Lisa stood to stretch, and he noticed her looking at the canvas. Oh, it looks like a ghost's, she said. Is a ghost? Boy said, yeah, for now. Ghosts become real, though, with time. She nodded, gathering her shawl. I'll be back tomorrow, she said. Don't rush. I'd rather wait for something good than have something pretty quick. He didn't tell her. He'd already painted over that collarbone line 3 times. Some things were just better left unsaid. That night, he couldn't sleep. He snuck back to the workshop, lit a single candle, and stared at the canvas in the dim light. The faint outlines looked just different. Laugh, sort of like unsofter, more alive. He picked up a brush, mixed the lighter shade of brown, and added a tiny stroke. The corner of her mouth just barely turned up. There, it wasn't tar so much, but it was a start. And for Emma da Vinci, starts were the hardest part. If you'd just stepped into the fast workshop in the spring of 1504, you might have wondered if a tornado had swept through. Piles of sketches teetered on every surface, laugh sort of like uncustom, rolled up like scrolls, others crumpled into balls that missed the overflowing wastebasket. Jaws of pigment cluttered the work table, their lids left askew, while brushes stood in a vase like wilted flowers. A half disassembled lute lay near the window, its strings dangling next to a skull that he petite. Just like used for anatomy studies. And in the middle of it all, propped on an easel draped with a dusty cloth, was Thea's Monatistiter. So literally, like feet half finished, looking surprisingly calm amid the chaos. The apprentices learned to navigate the mess like dancers. Like young Sandro could step over a pile of leather-bound notebooks without spilling his ink pot. Older Marco knew exactly where to find the good lin's oil hidden behind a rusted suit of armor that Leonard was probably improving. They do taken to labeling things with little notes. Oh, this jar has red, not brown or whatever. Do not touch the flying machine parts, laugh. Uncle Master will scream. Bay himself seemed oblivious to the clutter. He do just wander through the workshop muttering to himself and pick up whatever caught his eye, laugh. Like Unca feather, a shard of glass, a sketch of a horse, a hoof, uncuff before setting it down again in a new spot, further disrupting the fragile order. Chaos breeds creativity, he'd say, when Marco dared to suggest tidying up maybe too much order makes the brain lazy. Lisa, for her part, treated the mess like a familiar friend. She'd arrive with a basket of figs or a loaf of bread, like her way of thanking the apprentices for fetching water, stalking the fire, and weave her way to her chair, pausing now and then to glance at a particularly interesting sketch. Laugh, is that a machine for digging canals? She asked one morning, pointing to a drawing of like a contraption with gears and a bucket. Dingtail looked up, startled as if he'd have forgotten she was there. A Bing better juice machine for digging canals, he said, setting down his brush. The ones they use now take 3 men and still move half as much dirt as they should. Just this one, laugh. So Unca. He trailed off, suddenly excited, and grabbed a quill. See the gears here, Unc. She laughed. Yeah, master babe, I came to sit for my portrait. Not learn about canal digger. He grinned sheepish.
Yeah.
Right? The portrait, sorry, it's not just laugh. Just ideas. They come when they want.
Not when I do.
It wasn't just like sketches and machines, like cluttering the space. There were plants, literally rose herbs, like rosemary and sage, that Lone used to make pigments and strange flowers he collected from the countryside, their petals pressed between the pages of his notebooks. One shelf held a jar of pickled frogs for studying mussels, he explained, though no one asked, and a collection of seashells arranged by spiral pattern. Nature is the best artist, he say, running a finger over a nautilus shell. I just taking notes. The chaos reached its peak one afternoon when a cardinal from Rome paid an unexpected visit. He cared rumors of this miraculous portrait and just wanted a preview. Detail, who began experimenting with a new varnish made from tree sap, scrambled to cover the Dean laugh. Monta Lyserder with a cloth, knocking over a jar of ultramarine pigment in the process. Blue powder just exploded across the floor, coating the cardinal, velvet shoes, and sending the apprentices just diving for cover. Your Eminence, Alex said, bowing deeply. Yeah, a pleasure, please. Ignore the laugh. Artistic atmosphere. The cardinal, who spent decades in the Vatican's immaculate galleries, stared at the mess, laughed, unteed at the half-eaten bowl of soup, at the sketch of a nude man taped to the wall, at the blue footprint staining the stone floor. Uncan raised an eyebrow. You work into this sort of thing? Yeah, he asked. So shrugged. So shrugged. Works for me. Though, I admit the blue pigment was an accident, expensive accident. Ultramarine costs more than gold. The cardinal didn't stay long. He left muttering about artistic excess and lack of discipline, which suited date. Laugh there. He did never like having visitors while he worked, sort of unteed. They made him self-conscious, like someone was peering over his shoulder while he wrote a letter. After the cardinal left, Lisa helped clean up the blue powder. Her fingers stained blue, despite her best efforts. Laugh, you should charge Giocondo extra for this, she just said, wiping her hands on a rag. Portrait plus art therapy. Watching you work is like watching a storm. Just so essy but fascinating. He laughed, which actually made her laugh And for a moment, the clutter didn't matter. The half-finished painting, the scattered sketches, the blue footprints, sort of like they were all part of the process, a messy, beautiful process that would one day become something extraordinary. That evening, as the apprentices swept up the last of the pigment, friends stood in front of the white Mona Lisa, sold its sort of cloth, still draped over it. He thought about the cardinal disapproval, about the way order felt suffocating, about how the best ideas often came from the spaces between chaos and calm. Then he just pulled off the cloth, picked up his brush, and just got back to work. Leno kept a small notebook tucked in his apron, its pages filled with nothing but sketches of mouths. There were smiling mouths, frowning mouths, mouths just laugh and mid-sigh. Some were just quick charcoal smudges. Others were just detailed studies with every crease and wrinkle mapped out like topographical lines. The mouth is the trickiest part, he told Lisa one morning, flipping through the pages. Eyes can lie, but a smile, laugh, maybe it tells the truth. She leaned forward, curious, laugh. Oh, what's my smile saying that? He paused, studying her face, as if he'd never seen it before. The morning light caught the corner of her mouth, turning the skin like a warm gold. It's saying, laugh, uncool, something funny, but you are not really sure if you should share it. Her eyebrows shot up. You were good, she said. My husband tried to buy that vineyard again last week. He forgot the seller actually cheated him before. I didn't have the heart to tell him. He grinned, already reaching for his sketchbook. Oh, see, truth. Now hold that fault. Laugh, not the vineyard part, just Uncle the Smile part. Capturing that smile became something of an obsession. He'd make Lisa tell stories like Unca about her childhood, about her children, about the time she snuck out of the house to watch a traveling circus, laugh just like Untin sketch furiously while she talked, hoping to catch the smile unguarded. But it was like trying to catch a butterfly. The moment she noticed him looking, it would flit away, replaced by something like self-conscious. So he got clever. He hired a musician, laughed just like Unca, lutenist, with a knack for silly ballads, sort of like Unca to play in the corner of the workshop. While Lisa sat, the music was distracting enough that she did relax her face, softening into genuine amusement when the lutenist hit a wrong note or forgot the lyrics. Flando would pretend to work on the background, his brush moving slowly across the canvas, but his eyes were always on her, storing the memory of that smile away like a treasure. Is this cheating? Lisa asked one afternoon as the lutenist played a particularly absurd song about a donkey who thought it was a knight. Art is all cheating, he said, not looking up from the canvas. Yeah, tricks to make people feel something real. He tried other tricks too, laugh. He'd have Marco, the oldest apprentice, tell jokes like Unca bad ones, mostly about monks and turnips like Uncoin, and watch Lisa Seth's reaction from the corner of his eye. He'd place a mirror behind his easel so he could study her reflection, hoping a different angle would reveal the secret of that smile. Once he even brought in a puppy, sort of like laugh, Unca's shaggy thing with big paws that just tripped over its own feet, sort of like Unca, and let it run around the workshop. Lisa laughed so hard she cried that day, but by the time he set up his paints, the moment was gone. It's like chasing smoke, he muttered to himself that night, staring at the canvas. The smile he de-painted was nice enough. Just laughed, sort of like unpleasant, even sort of like uncut, but it lacked that spark, that hint of mischief. It looked like a Ted-painted G smile, not a Dean Liv G one. The problem, he realized, was that smiles aren't static. They change with light, with mood, with the angle of the head. What looked like warm in morning light looked so sad in afternoon shadow. What felt genuine at dawn felt forced by dust. He needed a way to paint a smile that changed, depending on how you looked at it. Laugh, just like Unca smile that was never quite the same twice. That's a laugh when he remembered the Dean Surmatorder technique he'd been experimenting with, Unca layering thin, transparent glazes of paint to create soft, smoky edges like mist over a field. It was time-consuming, tedious work, Each layer had to dry completely before the next could be applied, which meant waiting days, just laugh. Anka sometimes weeks, just like Ankara between brushstrokes, but if it worked, the smile would shift, depending on how the light hit the layers of paint, just like a real smile does. So he began again. He painted over the existing smile, carefully, slowly, until it was nothing but a faint ghost under the new layers. Then he started adding glazes, laugh like Unk. First like a thin layer of pink, then a hint of brown, and then a touch of red so faint it was almost clear. Each layer changed the color, slightly deepening the creases, softening the edges. Lisa watched, fascinated, as the smile slowly emerged from the canvas. Oh, it's like watching a flower bloom, she said. Slowly, he agreed. Yeah, very, very slowly. Weeks turned into months. The lieutenant stopped coming, like laugh. Les couldn't afford to pay him anymore, like Unka. But by then, Lisa didn't need the music. She detested sitting in her chair telling stories or just thinking, and every now and then, that smile would appear as if by magic, and each time, Les would add another layer, another whisper of color, until the smile on the canvas began to do what he does. So, shift and change depending on where you stood, depending on the light, depending on what kind of water distorter were feeling that day. One even, as the sun set, he stepped back and looked at it, really looked. The smile was there, laugh like uncanny, not a single fixed thing, but 1,000 tiny shifts, 1,000 different moments, all layered together. It was a smile that asked questions, that kept secrets, that felt so alive. He turned to Lisa, who'd been watching quietly. Yeah, what do you think? Yeah, he asked, laugh, suddenly, nervous. She didn't answer right away. She just stood there, looking at the painting, then at him, then back at the painting. Then she smiled like laugh, uncooking the real one, the one he'd been chasing all this time. Perfect, she said. Yeah, it looks like me. All of this pigment shelf looked like a chemist's laboratory. If the chemist had a thing for crushed insects and ground minerals, jars lined the shelves in rows labeled with scrawled notes. Yeah, vermilion laugh from Cinnabar, toxic, unco used sparingly. Yeah, lapis lazuli, unco imported from Afghanistan, expensive, unco only for skies. Yeah, saffron, unco from flowers, fades quickly, unco mixed with egg yolk to set. He treated each pigment like a precious ingredient, which, in a way, they were paint, he liked to say, was just colored mud. Until you knew how to mix it, right? Mixing paint for themed. So sort of like Mona Lisa, he became a ritual. Every morning before Lisa arrived, he'd set out his mortar and pestle, his jars of linse, oil, and turpentine, and get to work. It was messy work, just like laugh. Anka's fingers were perpetually stained, as if he'd dipped them in a rainbow and couldn't quite wash it off like Anka, and time consuming a single batch of flesh tone might take hours. And if it did to look right in the morning light, he'd do start over. Wasteful, laughed Giocondo grumbled during one rare visit, eyeing a pile of discarded pigment scrapings. Why not just buy like mixed paint, like everyone else? Galine. Tin look up from grinding lapis lazuli into a fine powder, because pre-mixed paint is for people who don't care if their skies look like mud. You want this portrait to last, so don't teach you laugh, so for your grandchildren to see it. Giocondo grunted. Yeah, I want it to be done you before my grandchildren are born. Lisa, sitting in her chair, stifled like a laugh. Bill shot her a grateful look. Pigments fade, he explained. Patience fraying sunlight. Humidity, dust, laugh, sort of like unk. They all eat away at paint. But if you just mix them right with the proper binders, they last. Laugh. The Egyptians knew that. So their murals in the tombs still bright after 3,000 years. He wasn't just being picky. He spent years studying how pigments interacted with each other, how some colors faded when paired with others, how oil binders dried at different rates depending on the weather. He kept notebooks filled with formulas. Oh, for skin, mix lead white with a touch of red lake and burnt sienna. Laugh. On peak, add more sienna for shadows. For lips, crimson lake diluted with linseed oil. layered over pink ochre. The most finicky pigment, the one he used for Lisa's skin. He called it his secret sauce. Though laugh, it was hardly a secret, just a carefully balanced mix of lead white for brightness, vermilion for warmth, and a dash of yellow ochre to mimic the glow of sunlight on skin. But getting the balance right was like seasoning a stew. Too much vermilion, and her cheeks looked flushed. Too little, and she just looked pale. Almost sickly. One afternoon, he just spent 3 hours mixing a batch only to realize it looked perfect in the shade, but washed out in direct sunlight. "This is so ridiculous," he muttered, dumping the mixture into a jar labeled fail number 17. Lisa, who'd have been watching, tilted her head. "Oh, what if you mixed 2 batches? One for the light parts, one for the shadow." He stared at her, then laughed. "Laugh? Oh, why didn't I think of that? Because I am overcomplicating things. That's why." So he did. So he made 2 versions of his flesh tone, one lighter with more lead white for the parts of her face catching the light, one darker with extra sienna for the hollows under her cheekbones and around her eyes. When layered with his dark supplementors, the effect was so subtle but striking, sort of like sunlight filtering through skin, warm and alive. Then there was just the background. He wanted the landscape behind Lisa to feel dreamlike, otherworldly. So he mixed pigments in ways that made no logical sense. He added a touch of green to the browns of the hills, making them look like they were glowing from within. He mixed ultramarine with a dash of violet for the distant mountains, a color that shouldn't exist in nature, but somehow felt right. "It's not about copying what I see," he told Lisa. "This is about painting what I like or feel like advanced, like just kind of some look at it." Of course, some pigments were more trouble than they were worth. He'd heard stories of artists like using arsenic-based greens that ate through canvas or mercury-based reds that poisoned their assistant. He stuck to safer options, mostly laugh. So unkind though, he did keep a small jar of dragon blood, like a red resin from a tropical tree locked in a drawer, using it sparingly for accents. Better safe than sorry. He dare say eye in the jar, like it might bite. By autumn, his hands were permanently stained, like Ancha, a mosaic of blues and reds and browns. Laugh, the apprentices joked that he'd become a walking palette, but he didn't mind. It was a badge of honor, just proof of the care he put into every brushstroke. One evening, as the sun set, he stood back and looked at the day. Mona Lisa in the fading light. The colors had so depth, richness, a kind of quiet intensity he'd never quite achieved before. The skin glowed, the background hummed with hidden colors, and Lisa's dressed like laugh. Just a soft muted brown with hints of gold. Uncut looked like it was made of real fabric. "Not worth the fuss," a laugh, Lisa asked, noticing his smile. He nodded, wiping a smudge of green paint from his cheek. "Yeah, worth every frustrating, messy time-consuming minute." Dingeth stared at the landscape behind Lisa, so his brow furrowed. Something was off. The road winding into the distance didn't quite line up with the mountains beyond it, and the river just looked like it was flowing uphill, which was impossible. Laugh, sort of like Unka, even in a dreamscape. He'd have spent hours sketching the perspective lines, mapping out the vanishing points with mathematical precision. Laugh, but somehow like the background still felt like wrong, like a puzzle with a missing piece. Perspective is a liar, so he muttered to himself, prodding the canvas with the end of his brush. It tricks the eye into seeing depth where there's only flat cloth and paint. Lisa, who'd been watching him pace, sighed. "Oh, you've been staring at that hill for an hour. It looks like a hill to me." "It's not like Korean, just laugh, Okuryu," he said, gesturing wildly. "It's a hill that needs to make sense. See how the road curves. It should lead your eye to that bridge, then to the mountains, then to just untoke nowhere. A vanishing point. But right now, It's a leading to a nothing liked her, just a blob of green paint. She leaned forward, squinting. Oh, maybe that's some. The point of road to nowhere. Seems poetic. He paused, poetic. He hadn't thought of it that way. He was too busy counting lines, measuring angles, trying to make the landscape obey the laws of geometry, like he spent years studying. Dean Less was obsessed with perspective. Laugh, sort of like Anta, had even written a treatise on it, filled with diagrams of how objects shrink as they recede into the distance. Art without perspective is like a body without bones. He'd written, it collapses. But Darder Mona Lisa sure wasn't too supposed to be like a textbook example. It was supposed to feel alive, like a window into another world. Laugh, sort of like just one that was familiar enough to recognize, but strange enough to wonder about. So why was he so stuck? He pulled out his perspective tools like a wooden ruler, a piece of string with a weight tied to one end, his homemade plumb line, and a small mirror. He held the mirror up to the canvas, flipping the image left to right, like a trick he used to spot mistakes. The reversed landscape looked even more disjointed. The left side was brighter, busier, with a winding path and a stone bridge. The right side was darker, calmer, with a lake and mist just covered hills. So they didn't balance, they didn't talk the coder to each other. Maybe they were not supposed to. Lisa said, just as if reading his mind. Maybe it sent two different places, like memory. One part clear, one part fuzzy. He thought of his own memories just like Laugh, growing up in Vinci, the hills outside town, the river that ran through the valley. Some days he remembered them vividly, the way the light hit the water at dawn, the sound of goats bleating in the distance. Other days they felt like dreams, hazy and shifting. Maybe the background didn't too need to make logical sense. Maybe it just needed total like Garfield G, like Dean, like a memory. That night, he dug through his notebooks until he found a sketch from years earlier. Laugh, sort of like Unca landscape he'd drawn while traveling through the Italian countryside with a strange winding river that seemed to loop back on itself. He'd thought it was a mistake at the time, a trick of the light, but now Laugh. So Unca traced the river with his finger. It didn't flow. Right, it didn't follow the rules, but it felt like right, G. The next morning, he mixed a whole batch of blue-green paint and started reworking the river. He made it curve more sharply, almost doubling back on itself, and added a misty haze where it just disappeared behind the hill. He softened the edges of the mountains, blurring them into the sky, so it was hard to tell where land ended and air began. He even moved the bridge slightly, just enough to make the eye linger, just wondering how to cross. It looks like a riddle. Lisa said, just watching him work. Good. She said, smiling. Yeah, riddles make people look longer. But the biggest challenge was actually making Lisa G fit with Guidescape. She was the focal point, the anchor, and if the perspective of the background clashed with her proportions, the whole painting would feel like off. He used a technique like he developed, measuring her height against the background elements, making sure her head was in proportion to the trees, her hands in scale with the distant hill. It was tedious work, requiring constant adjustments. Laugh. So Uncle, here a brushstroke to make her shoulders slightly broader, there a glaze to shrink the hill behind her. Anyway. Your arm looks longer than yesterday, Lisa noted just one afternoon. Whatever it is, he said, by half an inch, the perspective was making it look too short. Your brain knows how long an arm should be, even if your eyes don't. She shook her head. Oh, you laugh, Restrange. You know that most painters just unpaint, you calculate. Most painters don't care if their paintings outlive them, he said, which was true. He wanted to Pera Mona Lisa to be studied, argued over, puzzled over, laugh, just laugh, uncalled for centuries if possible, and to do that the details mattered, even the ones no one noticed at first glance. By the end of the week, the background felt so cohesive, like Laugh, sort of ungod dreamlike but cohesive. The road led nowhere. The river looped like a question mark, and the mountains faded into the sky. But when you looked at Lisa sitting there in front of it all, it made sense. She belonged there, in that strange, beautiful, impossible place. Intelli stepped back, wiping paint from his hands. Yeah, not bad laugh. But he said more to himself than to Lisa. Not bad. Yeah, she echoed. Laugh, yeah, it's magic. I almost want to walk into it. He grinned. That was the point, after all. To make people want to step into the painting, to wander the hills, to follow the river, to ask questions, and maybe just to wonder about the woman sitting there, smiling that smile. In the spring of 1506, being the catastrophe so the coming ascetic in the corner of his workshop thus began to settle on the cloth, and so spiderwebs crept up the whole edges of the easel. For 2 years it would sit there half finished while he turned his attention to other things. People would ask about it like uncut Giocondo, most of all his patients wearing thinner with each passing month, laughed sort of like uncut but date, just shrugged it. It's not ready, he'd say, and leave it at that. The truth was, he'd gotten so distracted, not by something so trivial, but by a commission that was too tempting to refuse. Painting a mural for the Palazzo Vecchio, Florence town hall depicting the Battle of Ancona. So it was a grand, chaotic scene like laugh, sort of like horses rearing, soldiers clashing, banners waving like uncut, and it appealed to his love of movement, of capturing the energy of a moment. The Giamona, Lisa knew, with its quiet stillness, suddenly felt like a whisper in a room full of shouts. Battle scenes, really? Yeah, Lisa asked when she heard she'd stopped coming to the workshop regularly, her visits tapering off as Leonardo's attention wandered. You're abandoning a woman for a bunch of men in armor. Oh, he wins. Abandoning is such a strong word. I am laugh, sort of like uncut, taking a detour. This mural could change things. It's center for the city, not just one merchant. She raised an eyebrows. Laugh. Oh, and what about your promise to take time to get it right? I like G will. G finish it. He said more defensively than he intended, just not now they're sending me deadline. The city council wants it done by next year. Deadlines. Funny how you suddenly care about them, she said. But there was no malice in her voice, so just amusement. He threw himself into the mural, working from dawn till dusk. He sketched horses in every pose, laugh like uncareering, galloping, falling, unkeyed, and studied soldiers' faces, their expressions twisted with rage or fear. He even bought a suit of armor and hung it in the workshop, using it to practice painting metal. So the book, like Monet, Lisa G's cloth cover, grew grayer, and he rarely glanced at it. But distractions have a way of multiplying, so while working on the mural, he was asked to design a new irrigation system for the Honor River, a project that fascinated him more than just paint and canvas. He spent weeks surveying the riverbanks, sketching dams and canals, forgetting about both the mural and the portrait. Laugh. Then a cardinal from Rome invited him to design a new chapel, and he couldn't resist, just like architecture, with its mix of art and engineering, was another obsession. Your mind is like a butterfly, Lisa said when she visited once, catching him mid-sketch of a dome. Yeah, always flitting to the next flower. He smiled, sheepish. Oh, there's so much to learn, so much to make. I don't want to waste time. Wasting time is different from rushing, she said. Yeah, you told me that once. He thought of that conversation often, especially when the mural stalled. The Battle of Ancona was proving harder than he'd imagined. The composition felt forced, the energy artificial. He'd paint a section, then scrape it off, frustrated it's not alive. He muttered to like no one in particular. Laugh, just UV break, uncut noise. By 1508, the mural was half finished and bored. He'd moved on to dissecting human corpses, trying to understand how muscles and tendons worked. Laugh, So, like, just Unca project that horrified some fascinated other. He filled notebooks with detailed drawings of skeletons and organs, his curiosity overriding any sort of squeamishness. Thuramona Lyserter remained in its corner, all but forgot. Gyatkondo, by this point, was furious. He paid like half the money up front, and he wanted his painting.
Hire someone else to finish it.
He threatened during a heated argument. Last, Disney need care. Yeah, hire them. He said, yeah, they want to get it right. They want to understand what she just laughed. My wife, Giocondo, said. The mate shook his head, laughed. She's so more than that to me. At least that was the real reason. He set it aside. He realized not because of the mural or the river or the chapel, because the book Mona Lyserter just mattered too much. It wasn't just a portrait anymore. It was a puzzle. He wasn't sure he could solve a question. He wasn't sure he could answer. So what did it mean to capture a person, to paint not just their face, but their sort of essence? He was afraid of just failing. So he kept busy chasing one project after another until 1510, when Lisa's daughter died, a small, quiet girl named Marietta, who sometimes tagged along to the workshop, just sitting on the floor and drawing with like charcoal. Diantuli heard the news from a servant, and something in him shifted. He walked to the corner of the workshop, pulled off the cloth, covering the true like Mona Lisa, laughed then, and stared at it. There she was. Lisa frozen just in time, her smile hinting at secrets, her eyes full of questions. He thought of Marietta, of how quickly life fades, of how few things left. He picked up a brush. Maybe it was time to stop running. The cloth came off in 1510, but it took another month for Emma to pick up a brush, stand in front of Thurder, Monet, Lisa G for hours, just looking just Unk at the half, finished landscape at the faint outlines of Lisa Soon, hands at the smile that was still more ghost than real. It felt like visiting an old friend, like he'd neglected, and guilt gnawed at him. I am sorry, he whispered to the canvas one morning, as if it could hear. The Chiji when it came was small and unexpected. Lisa arrived at the workshop. Yoon announced, her eyes red from crying, a crumpled letter in her hand. Marietta would have loved this, she said, gesturing to the painting. She used to ask when the lady with the secret would be finished. Telly's throat tightened. He disliked Marietta, laughed sort of like Unker curiosity, her habit of sneaking peeks at his sketches when she thought he wasn't looking. I should finished it sooner, he said. She shook her head. Oh, number, you needed to be ready, and now you are. He didn't argue. Something had shifted, not just in him, but in the painting. The colors, which had seemed so flat and lifeless under the cloth, now hummed with potential. The background, once a confusing jumble of lines, now looked like a place he wanted to explore. And so Lisa's face laughed, like Unka half painted, half promise. Unka felt like a story begging to be told. That afternoon, he mixed a fresh batch of flesh tone, his hands steadier than they deepened. In years, he worked slowly, carefully, adding a thin layer of glaze to Lisa's cheek, just deepening the shadow just below her eye. The brushstrokes were smaller, more deliberate than they'd been before. He wasn't rushing to finish anymore. He was just savoring the process. Lisa visited more often after that, sometimes bringing her youngest son, Andrea, who'd sit on the floor and watch really wide-eyed. Is that magic? Laugh? Yeah, Andrea asked one day, pointing to the way the colors seemed to shift in the light. Of a sort. Asta said, yeah, the magic of taking time. He found himself noticing things he'd missed before. The way Lisa's left eyebrow arched slightly higher than her right, like a quirk, like he'd never captured in his sketches. a tiny scar on her lower lip from a childhood fall that only appeared when she smiled, the way her fingers curled around the arm of the chair as if she was hanging onto something. These details, so small as they were, made her real. One evening, as the sun set, he added the final touch to her left hand, laugh, just like sort of like faint highlight on her ring finger, catching the light just so he stepped back, and for the first time, he saw her, not as a model, not as a commission, but as Lisa, like uncut wife, mother woman, with a lifetime of stories. It's like she's like breathing, Lisa said, standing beside him. He nodded. Oh, that's what I wanted for hers to feel alive even when we were gone. The months that followed were probably some of the most productive of his life. So he reworked the background, softening the mountains into mist, adding a faint path that seemed to lead toward Lisa, as if the landscape itself was drawn to her. He adjusted the smile, deepening the creases at the corners of her mouth, making it warmer, more knowing. He even repainted her dress, adding subtle patterns that mimicked the folds of real fabric, so it looked like it would probably rustle if she really moved. There were setbacks. Of course, a storm flooded the workshop, damaging some of his sketches, but sparing the painting. A whole batch of ultramarine pigment turned out to be fake, forcing him to wait like weeks for a new shipment. And Giocondo, ever impatient, threatened to withdraw his funding more than once, but Link didn't waver. It'll be done when it's set done, he said. And for once, Giocondo did sort of argue. What surprised him most was how much he looked forward to the work. Waking up at dawn, mixing paint by the light of a single candle, losing himself in the rhythm of brushstrokes, laugh, anku, these things felt like a gift. He'd spent so many years, like chasing new ideas, new projects, that he'd forgotten the joy of just finishing something. One morning, Lisa arrived to find him asleep on a cot in the corner of the workshop, like a brush, still in his hand, a painting, glowing in the morning light. She covered him with a blanket and sat down watching the sun rise over the canvas. When Emma woke, she was smiling. "She's ready," she said. "You both are like..." Laugh, he looked at the painting, then at her, then back at the painting, and for the first time in years, he didn't see work left to do so. He saw a finished story, just like Anka's story about a woman, a painter, and the magic of taking time. And once wrote in his notebook, "Oh, the hands are the mirrors of the soul." He'd spent years studying them, laugh, like just sketching the knobbed fingers of farmers, the delicate hands of noblewomen, the calloused palms of musicians. But none had fascinated him quite like Lisa. Sad they were just ordinary hands, in a way, laugh. Just like slender, with neatly trimmed nails, a few faint scars from household chores, like just But there was something in the way she held them, something in the tension of her fingers that felt like a story waiting to be told. He started with rough sketches, of course, pages and pages of hands. Hands folded in laps, hands gripping chairs, hands like holding flowers or books or nothing at all. Lisa would sit patiently while he drew, wiggling her fingers now, and then to keep them from stiffening, "You were making a fuss over nothing," she'd say, watching him erase yet another line. They just hand. Just hands, oh, he delicate, mock offended, laugh. Hands do everything. They build, they heal, they fight, they love. Look at yours. Just like how you brush your hair away from your face when you're rethinking, how you press your thumb against your forefinger when you're re-annoyed. They tell the truth even when your mouth doesn't. She does just roll her eyes, but he does see her smiling when she thought he wasn't to her looking. The problem was decide her how guide them. Laugh at first she positioned her right hand resting on the arm of the chair, fingers played, a posture that felt too casual, too relaxed, like for the sort of quiet intensity of her face. Then he tried crossing her arms, but that made her look pretty defensive, closed off. For weeks, the hands in the painting remained little more than blobs of flesh, colored paint while he fretted over the perfect pose. It wasn't until a rainy afternoon, when Lisa arrived at the workshop with a basket of sewing, that he found his answer. She just set the basket down, pulled out a shirt she was mending, and just settled into her chair, her left hand supporting the fabric, her right hand holding a needle. For a moment, she froze her laugh, right hand hovering just above her left wrist, fingers slightly curled. It was a small, unguarded gesture, just like the kind of thing you do without thinking. Breath call. That's it, he said, already reaching for his sketchbook. Yeah. Don't move, not a muscle. She laughed, nearly spoiling the pose. Laugh. Oh, I have to breathe, Dantia. Breathe quietly, he said, scribbling furiously. That was the breakthrough. The right hand resting gently on the left wrist, fingers curved as if still holding an invisible needle. The left hand cupped in her lap, palm upward as if offering something. Laugh like uncouth. Though what he wasn't sure, it was a pose that felt both natural and deliberate, casual and charged, and it just mirrored the ambiguity of her smile. Now came the hard part, painting them. He worked slowly, more slowly than he had on any other part of the painting. So layering glaze after thin glaze of paint to build depth. He paid attention to the smallest details, the way the light caught the knuckles, the faint blue veins visible under the skin, the tiny creases where her fingers just met her palm. Too much, he muttered one evening, staring at the right hand. The shadows were too dark, making her fingers look swollen, unnatural. He just spent just 3 days on that hand, and it still didn't just feel right. He mixed a batch of light flesh tone, thinned with linseed oil, and carefully began to soften the shadows. It was tedious work, requiring a steady hand and a really keen eye. One wrong brushstroke, and he'd just have to start over. The apprentices learned to tiptoe around him when he was working on the hands, afraid a loud noise might make him jerk. Lisa watched fascinated just as the hands slowly emerged from the canvas. They looked like they could move, she said, reaching out to touch the painting, then pulling back, just as if afraid she might disturb it. That's the idea, he said. Yeah, movement without motion, like a paused breath. He obsessed over the details, the way her thumb curved, the way her pinky finger was slightly crooked, a quirk like you do noticed in his sketches. Just the way the light shifted from her palm to her knuckle. He even added a faint highlight to the tip of her right index finger, as if it had recently been touching something warm, like laugh, like uncut needle, a cup, a child says cheek. Is that necessary? Yeah, Lisa asked, laugh, noticing the highlight. Nothing's necessary, he said. Yeah, but it helps. It makes you wonder. By the time he was satisfied, he'd spent nearly a month on the hands alone. Laugh unca longer than some painters spent on entire portraits, like Giocondo, who dropped by to check on progress, raised an eyebrow when he saw how little of the painting had changed. So you've been working under her hand steer for weeks? Tim first nodded. Oh, they matter. Well, Giocondo sighed. Yeah, sometimes I think you read deliberately trying to drive me mad. Madness is just seeing things like others don't, though, he said, which was his way of ending the conversation. When he finally stepped back to admire his work, he felt a strange sense of pride. Sort of like just sure pride different from finishing a landscape or a sketch of a machine. These hands weren't just part of the painting. They were a conversation with the viewer, a silent question, laugh. What had she been holding? What was she really about to do? What was she hiding? Lisa stood beside him, her own hands resting in her lap in almost the same pose. Oh, they look like mine, she said. Yeah, but better. Not better, he said. Oh, truer. The you that's worth remembering. She smiled, and for a moment he thought about painting that smile again, capturing it forever. But no, laugh. So Anka, some things were better left unsaid. Some things were just better left to the hand. The landscape behind Lisa is like a world of contradictions, a river that loops back on itself like a snake biting its tail. A bridge that leads nowhere. Mountains that glow with an unnatural greenish hue as if lit from within. Like it's not a place like you do you find on any map, and Leonardo liked it that way. Maps are for travelers, he told himself. This is for dreamers. He started with simple sketches, like laugh, hills, trees, a distant road, like Unco, but they felt too ordinary, too much like the countryside outside Florence. Lisa deserved something stranger, something that matched the mystery of her smile. So he dug into his notebooks, pulling out sketches like he'd made over the years. A valley he'd have seen in a dream, its waters a deep, unnatural blue. A road that seemed to climb straight into the clouds, drawn during a feverish night of work on a flying machine. A rock formation that looked like a sleeping giant just sketched while traveling through the Alps. This is cheating, he muttered, flipping through the pages, stealing from my own dreams. But he kept doing it, stitching together like fragments of memory and imagination into a landscape that felt like both familiar and otherworldly. The river was the first puzzle. He'd painted it straight, at first flowing from the mountains to the foreground, but it looked too unclogical. So he just erased it, redrawing it in a lazy curve that doubled back on itself, as if reluctant to leave the scene. Rivers don't do that, Marco laughed, said, just leaning over his shoulder. Maybe they should. It said water has a mind of its own. Maybe it lingers where it wants. He added, a misty haze where the river disappeared behind a hill, making it unclear whether it ended there or continued on. Maybe invisible. Laugh. Then there were the roads, two of them winding through the hills, neither quite reaching the horizon. One curved gently to the left, disappearing into a stand of trees. The other dipped down into a valley, vanishing behind a stone bridge. Where did they go? Lisa asked one afternoon, her eyes following the left road, as if she could see beyond just the canvas. He shrugged. Yeah, nowhere, everywhere. It depends on who's looking. The trees, too, were strange. He painted them with thin, twisting trunks, their branches reaching toward the sky like fingers. Some were bare, their limbs gnarled and black. Others were lush with leaves, but the leaves were an odd bluish green, a color like he'd have mixed using lapis lazuli and a dash of copper oxide. Trees don't look like that, Sandro said so helpfully. These do, Lawler said. Yeah, they're not Rodder Trees Resort. There were memories of trees or wishes. He spent weeks on the background working in short bursts between sessions on Lisa's face. It was like a welcome distraction, a chance to lose himself in color and form without the pressure of capturing a whole human expression. He'd stand back, squinting and adjust a hill here, soften a cloud there, until the landscape felt like a living thing, just breathing in time with Lisa. One of his favorite tricks was the use of like sumato in the background to laugh, sort of like not just for Lisa's sound face. He blurred the edges of the mountains, making them fade into the sky and soften the lines between land and water, so it was hard to tell where one ended and the other began. It was as if the world itself was melting, dissolving into the same dreamlike state as Lisa's smile. Is that the castle? Yeah, laughed Lisa asked, pointing to a tiny structure nestled between two hills. He leaned in, squinting, maybe a ruin or a trick of the light. It painted it quickly, almost without thinking. A faint smudge of gray that could be anything. Just let people decide. He said the best stories are the ones you finish yourself. The more he worked on the background, the more he realized it wasn't just a setting for Lisa laugh, just like it was a reflection of her. The winding river mirrored the complexity of her thoughts. The misty hills, the secrets. She kept like the two roads, the choices she'd made in life. It was a portrait of her inner world, painted in greens and blues and browns. Giacondo, during one of his rare visits, frowned at the landscape. It looks like nothing like our villa, he said. I paid for a portrait, not a fairy tale. He laughed and he argued. He just pointed to Lisa Sisa. face. Oh, does she look like herself? Giocondo studied the painting, then nodded grudgingly. Yeah, yes. Then the rest doesn't too matter, as he said. Oh, she sighed. Real the rest can be magic. By the time he was done, the background felt like a character in its own right. Laugh, like just a silent companion to Lisa, sharing her secrets, mirroring her moods. It was like a world you could get lost in, like a world that made you wonder. And that was exactly what he wanted. One evening, as the sun set, he stood back and looked at the painting. Lisa sitting quietly, her hands folded, her smile like a mystery. The landscape, winding and wild and full of secrets. Together, they felt like a question hanging in the air. Who is she? Where is this place? What happens just next? He smiled. Maybe some questions were better left unanswered. Mistakes happened, even to his laugh. They usually came in the quiet moments, sort of like unco, when his mind wandered to flying machines or river currents, when his hand slipped because he'd forgotten to eat, when the light shifted without warning and turned a carefully mixed pigment muddy. But there's the thing about mistakes. He do learn to love them, or at least to pretend he did. Mistakes are just the universe. Sin way of suggesting a better idea. He did just tell his apprentices, even when he was just secretly cursing. The first big mistake happened with Lisa's ear. He'd painted it too large. So the lobe drooping slightly, giving her a lopsided look that made her seem older than she was. He didn't notice until Lisa pointed it out, her voice gentle but firm. My ear isn't TG, G-Dowder, she said, touching her own earlobe. Not even close. He just stared at it for a full minute, wondering how he'd missed it. Then he'd laughed just like a loud, sudden laugh that startled the apprentices. It looks like a walnut, a very sad walnut. He just mixed a batch of flesh tone the next morning and covered the ear completely, starting over with a lighter touch, a steadier hand. The new ear was smaller, more delicate, and somehow more eerily, thank you. He told Lisa later for just saving me from the walnut ear. Another mistake involved the background. He'd painted a cluster of trees. Too dark, making them look like a black hole in the landscape, just swallowing the light. He didn't realize his error until he stepped back to admire his work and just noticed how the trees drew the eye away from Lisa, like a loud noise in a quiet room. Oops, he muttered, which was just about as dramatic as he got when things went wrong. Fixing that mistake took days. He couldn't have just paint over the dark trees. Left like uncoiled paint doesn't work that way. Not if you want the layers to dry properly. Instead, he used a technique called glazing, adding thin, transparent layers of green and brown paint to lighten the trees. Gradually, each layer had to dry completely before the next, which meant waiting, just like empty days, sometimes just uncut between brushstrokes. Patience, he told himself, staring at the slow drying paint. Patience is an artist's best tool. Then there was the incident with the varnish. He'd been experimenting with a new recipe, like mixing tree sap with turpentine and a dash of lavender oil, just convinced it would make the colors pop. He applied like a thin layer to the upper corner of the painting, near Lisa's shoulder, and left it to dry overnight. When he returned in the morning, his heart sank. The varnish had turned yellow, just streaking the canvas like old urine. Disaster. He whispered, which was rare for him. He just hated drama, but this felt like a disaster. The yellow streak was so bright, impossible to ignore, and he had no idea how to fix it. Lisa arrived that morning to find him pacing, muttering about stupid lavender oil and really arrogant experiments. She looked at the streak, then at him, and then back at the streak. It's not that bad. She said, it looks like sunlight. A little splash of sunlight on your shoulder. He stopped pacing. Laugh. Sunlight. She nodded. Laugh. Oh, see, it fades as it goes down, like the sun's out just touching you there. Laugh. He squinted, trying to see it through her eyes. Maybe just like Unka. Maybe she was right. The streaker Bing Diders looked like light, faint, and warm, as if the sun was peeking over Lisa's shoulder. He just mixed a tiny amount of the same yellowish varnish and added a few faint streaks elsewhere in the painting. Laugh just along her hairline, on the edge of her sleeve, just blending them into the existing color. So by the end of the day, the mistake had become part of the painting and its charm, a subtle reminder of the sun that had bathed the workshop that morning. Happy accidents, he said to Lisa, who was just watching him work. Happy being. Adaptation, she corrected. Yeah, you didn't let it break you. You let it change things. He thought of that later when he accidentally knocked over a jar of brown pigment, splattering a tiny drop onto Lisa's dress. Instead of panicking, he added a few more drops, blending them into the fabric to look like shadows, sort of like laugh, depth where there had been flatness. It was better than before, richer, more real. Not all mistakes were fixable. Of course, there was the time he tried to paint Lisa's necklace too quickly, the lines messy and uneven. He had to scrape off the paint completely, damaging the canvas slightly, and just start over. Sometimes you have to admit defeat.
He told the apprentices who were watching pretty wide, pretty-eyed, but never for long.
By the time the painting was nearly finished, it was full of these little secrets, places where mistakes had turned into magic, where accidents had become essential. We like to think of them as fingerprints, proof that a human being had made this, not a machine, imperfect, alive. Lisa noticed them too. She pointed to a tiny smudge near Lisa's elbow, a leftover from a botched attempt at shading. "What's that?" "Yeah," she asked. "Laugh." He smiled. "Yeah, reminder that even the best plans go wrong, and sometimes that's a good thing." So the whispers started in the market square, where Florentines loved to gossip over barrels of olives and loaves of bread. He's not been working on that portrait for her. So basically, years adur, fishmonger would say, scales still clinging to his apron. "My daughter could have fainted it faster, and she's 7, a tailor measuring a nobleman for a doublet would nod in agreement. Oh, damn, then she's lost his touch. Too busy chasing dreams of flying machines to finish a really simple painting." And I've heard the whispers, of course. They followed him, like a bad smell, clinging to him even in the quiet of his workshop. He tried not to let them bother him, like Anki had been called a dreamer, a procrastinator, a failure before, laughed like Anke, but something about these comments stung. This wasn't just another unfinished project. This was the Jeep Mona Lisa G. Craig. Giocondo predictably was the loudest critic. He stormed into the workshop, his face red with frustration, and demand updates. "My wife is aging." So he say, gesturing at the canvas. "By the time you finish, she'll probably look like her own mother." Emma would just shrug, mixing paint as if Giocondo. His words were nothing but background noise. "Better portrait that lasts than one that fades," he say. "Patience, Francesco. Good things just take time." But Giocondo wasn't he the only one. Other artists stopped by too. So sat young, ambitious painters eager to prove themselves. They either the Mona Lisa with a mix of curiosity and disdain, their smiles so tight. You're overcomplicating it. One would say a painter known for his quick, flashy portraits of nobles. A face is like a face. Laugh. I spent months on a smile. Gilda would invite them to stay just to watch him work, but they rarely stayed so long. They didn't understand the slow dance of glazes, the careful study of light, the way a single brushstroke could change everything. They wanted to finish Lafbrett to move on to the next commission, to make their names. Solano wanted to Cardias understand this. Even his apprentices had their doubts, though. They were too polite to say it outright. Sandro, the boldest, once asked, "Yeah, master, why not just laugh, just speed up? You know what she looks like. Why not paint it from memory?" Dean Les put down his brush and looked at the boy. "Memory lies," he said. "It smooths out like the rough edges. Laugh makes things prettier than they are. I want to paint the G truth." proofs of her. The way her smile fades when she's sighting, the way her eyes narrow when she had just annoyed memory can't talk like that. The church, too, had opinions. A priest from San Lorenzo stopped by once, ostensibly to commission a painting of the Virgin Mary, but spent most of his visit lecturing Leonardo about wasting talent on secular art. Oh, you should be painting saints, not merchants' wives, he said, his voice sharp laugh. What good is this portrait? Maybe it one tea saves souls. They thought of Lisa's smile, of the way it held both joy and sorrow, of the way it made him feel less alone in the world. Not everything needs to save souls, he said. Some things just need to liken, just see, just that. The criticism reached a peak in 1515, when Leontar was nearly finished. A group of wealthy patrons visited the workshop, led by a Florentine banker who fancied himself like an art expert. They stood in front of the wed Monita Lisa G. Cook, snickering and pointing. Look at those eyes. One said, they follow you around the room. Creepy. If you ask me, oh, the background's like a mess. Another added, rivers don't teach them like that. It's like childish. Ding 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 ding. He just stood there, his hands behind his back, watching them. When they'd finished, the banker turned to him and said, oh, honestly, Dan Vinci, I expected better. For the time you be spent, it's enough. So you break, uncut, underwhelming. Dean Utter smiled, laugh, uncut, a small tight smile, much like Lisa S. Underwhelming is good. He said it just means you'll come back to look again, to wonder. Great art doesn't shout, Sino, it whispers, and sometimes whispers last longer than just shouts. The banker huffed and led his group out, muttering about eccentric old men and overrated artists. Friend didn't care. Laugh. He turned back to the painting, picked up his brush, and added a tiny highlight to Lisa Cipher. Anka, a final touch. Barely visible, but pretty essential. Lisa, who'd been sitting quietly in her chair during the whole exchange, just stood up and walked over to him. You did get angry, she said. I thought you would. He shrugged. Anger is like a waste of energy. Besides, they're not wrong. It laugh. Visa, urger, underwhelming. Like unkept at first, but that's the point. I want people to keep looking, so to keep asking, to keep seeing new things, even after all these years. She nodded, as if she understood. Yeah, and will they? Laugh. He looked at the painting, at Lisa's eyes, at her smile, at the winding river and the misty hills. Oh, I think so, he said. Oh, I hope so. By 1516, the end was in sight, not the abrupt, triumphant end of a race, but the slow, soft end of a long journey. Laugh, just sort of like uncut, the kind where you notice the destination approaching for miles, savoring each step. Anton could feel it in the way he lingered over small details, like adding a tiny highlight to Lisa's sering or just softening a shadow on her neck. Laughed not because it needed fixing, but because he didn't want to stop. He'd be taken to working in the evenings when the workshop was quiet and the lights slanted through the windows in golden streaks. The apprentices had gone home, so the street vendors had packed up their carts, and the only sounds were the scratch of his brush against canvas and the occasional hoot of an owl. It was in these quiet moments that the painting felt most alive, as if Lisa was just sitting there with him, keeping him like company. One evening, he stood back and realized he couldn't find anything else to fix. The smile was just there, shifting and changing in the fading light. The hands, with their gentle curve, looked ready to move. Like the background, with its winding river and misty hills, felt like a world you could step into. Maybe it was done, or as done as it would ever be. He didn't shout or cheer. He just stood there, his hands on his hips, and smiled. Laugh, Unka, a rare, unguarded smile that felt like a weight lifting for years. This painting had always been a puzzle, a frustration, obsession. Now it was like Unka thing, a thing he made with his own hands out of paint and patience and stubbornness. He walked to the window and looked out at the moon, full and bright, hanging low in the sky. It felt like a pretty good omen. He started this painting under a full moon to all those years ago. Funny how time loops back on itself, he thought, like just the river in the background. The next morning, he sent a note to Lisa. Oh, it's ready. Come see. She arrived an hour later, her face calm, but her eyes wide with curiosity. He depropped the painting on an easel near the window, where the morning light would hit it just right. He didn't say anything as she walked toward it, just watched her face, just like waiting for her reaction. She stopped in front of it, her breath catching for a long time. She said nothing. She just looked like laugh, just unquote at her smile, at her hands at the landscape behind her. Then she reached out as if to touch the canvas and pulled back as if afraid she might break it. It's the laugh, so just so UV break, like UV break, uncone poopy. She said, her voice quiet, but not just me. It's unto you, all of me. The parts I like, the parts I hide, the parts I didn't even know were there. He nodded. His throat tight. That was it, exactly. He wanted to paint more than her face. He wanted to paint herder, like just like Ted, like Resort Love Development, the laughter, the quiet strength, the secrets, and somehow against all odds, he'd done it. Giocondo arrived later that day, grumbling as usual about the time it had taken, but even he fell silent when he saw the painting. It's a laugh just like so UV break, unca better than I imagined, he said, which was high praise from a man who rarely admitted to being wrong. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a leather pouch, heavy with coins, laughed just the rest of the payment, plus a little extra for your trouble, he said, which was as close to an apology as he'd ever get. Didn't Ty care about the money. He cared about the way Giocondo looked at the painting, really looked like, as if seeing his wife for the first time. He cared about the way Lisa had smiled when she saw it, a smile that just matched the one on the canvas. He cared about the quiet pride he felt, not just in the painting, but in himself. He'd just finished something that mattered. Over the next few weeks, he couldn't have stopped looking at it. He'd come into the workshop early, just to stand in front of it, or just stay late, just watching how it changed in the candlelight. It was like visiting an old friend, one who knew all your secret. He even let a few trusted friends see it, like laugh, like Unka, a fellow artist, a scholar, who helped him with his anatomy studies, a nun from the nearby convent, who loved art. They all reacted differently. The artist marveled at the wetofilmatom der technique, the way the colors blended into each other like smoke. The scholar studied the background, pointing out the mathematical precision of the perspective. The nun smiled at Lisa's eyes, saying, "Oh, she looks like sort of like looking at God." Didn't tell me to correct any of them. Let them see what they wanted to see. Laugh. That was kind of the magic of it. This painting didn't belong to him anymore. It belonged to whoever looked at it, whoever wondered, whoever found their own story in it. As the days passed, he started to pack up his workshop. He'd been invited to France to work for King Francis I, and he couldn't say no. A new adventure, a new chance to learn, to create, to wonder. But he couldn't leave their Mona Lisa behind. It had just become too much a part of him, like a limb or a memory. He wrapped it carefully in linen, padding it with old sketches to protect it from bumps, and packed it in a wooden crate. As he nailed the lid shut, he felt like a pang of sadness. Goodbyes were hard, maybe even to think. But as he lifted the crate onto a cart, he smiled. This wasn't of an ending. Really, it was a beginning of the painting's life out in the world, being seen, being wondered, and just being really loved. And isn't that what we all want? Like to be seen, to be remembered, to leave something behind that lasts. Laugh. King Francis I of France didn't just admire the like Mona Lisa is like just Lisa, like he fell in love with it. When he brought it to his court in 1516, the king immediately recognized its magic. offering the artist a castle and a generous stipend in exchange for keeping the painting nearby. It's not just a portrait, he told his courtiers, who were baffled by his obsession. It's like a window into soul. Fowler lived out his final years in France, and when he died in 1519, the Guide Montefort, Lyserder, became part of the king's scarce collection, just hanging in the palace of Fontainebleau. For decades, it was just another treasure among many. Laugh, sort of like uncut, admired, certainly, but not yet the icon it would become. That changed in 1797 when Napoleon Bonaparte seized it, hanging it in his bedroom in the Tuileries Palace. It's settled, the only thing in this room that doesn't lie. He reportedly said, though, whether that's true or just another story added to the painting. A cell legend is anyone. So I guess, by the time it was moved to the Louvre in 1804, their Mona Lisa had started to gather a following. Artists flocked to study it, copying third serif Saporna.
Technique, the way the eyes seem to follow you across the room, the mystery of that smile. Writers wrote poems about it, philosophers debated its meaning, and tourists just stared at it for hours just trying to solve its riddles.
But it was a heist that turned it into a global phenomenon. So in 1911, a former Louvre employee named Vincenzo Perugia walked out of the museum with the painting tucked under his coat, hiding it in his apartment, just for 2 years before being caught. The theft really made headlines around the world, and when the book Mona Lisa was returned in 1913, crowds lined up around the block to see it. So many of them people who never cared about art before. It's not just a painting anymore. A Paris newspaper declared it's a celebrity. And celebrities, of course, attract attention, laugh, unquote, both adoration and scrutiny. Picasso was questioned during the theft investigation. He was so innocent. It turned out adding a touch of scandal to the story. Salvador Dali painted a surrealist version of it, with melting clocks and distorted features, paying homage to its enduring influence. Andy Warhol made silkscreens of it, turning it into pop art, proving that even after 400 years, it could still feel like so fresh. What is it about this painting that keeps us coming back? Maybe it's on the smile laugh, just like Unco, the way it shifts depending on where you stand, what kind of mood you're in, what time of day it is. Look at it straight on and it's like a soft, almost sad smile. Look at it from the side and it's a playful, even mischievous. It's all like a mirror reflecting back whatever we want to see. Or maybe it's mystery who Vivi is laugh, so edited. She really so Lisa Del Giocondo, certainly, but also so much more. Over the years, people have seen everything in her eyes, secrets, sorrow, wisdom, even hope. Some claim there are hidden messages in the background, symbols of Leonardo's scientific theories or his thoughts on religion. Others say it's self-portrait, with Leonardo painting himself as a woman. The truth, laugh, it doesn't really matter. The mystery is just part of the magic. Then there's the way it's painted. Laugh, just like layers of glaze, the soft edges, the way it feels alive, even after all these centuries. Oltoy just paint a portrait. He built a world one brushstroke at a time, and that world feels as real today as it did in 1519. Stand in front of it at the Louvre, surrounded by crowds, and you can almost hear the lutenist playing in Leonardo's workshop, almost smell the linseed oil and charcoal, almost see Lisa sitting there, smiling, that kind of smile. It's also a reminder of the power of slow work. So in a world that values speed, that rewards quick fixes and instant gratification, the book, Karina Lisature, is a rebellion. It took years to paint, years of doubt and frustration and small, careful choices, and that slowness is part of its beauty. It's like a testament to the idea that good things laugh, great things take time. Today, millions of people visit the Mona Lisa art every year, jostling for position in front of the bulletproof glass, snapping photos, trying to catch a whole glimpse of that smile. Some are disappointed. It's smaller than I thought, they say, laugh or whatever. It's not that impressive, but others just stand there quiet for minutes on end, lost in the painting, and you can see it in their faces just to uncure the same curiosity that Leonardo felt all those years ago. 500 years is a long time. Empires rise and fall, languages change, technologies come and go. But their Mona Lisa remains still smiling, still asking questions, still making us wonder. Emma would felt like that. Probably, maybe he spent his whole life chasing ideas that outlived him, and in this painting, he succeeded. It's not just a masterpiece. It's like a friend, a mystery, a mirror. And after 500 years, it's still got plenty to say. Thirder Mona Lisa hangs there, still in the Louvre, behind its glass, just as it has for so long. The crowds ebb and flow, the flash of cameras like flickers, like fireflies. But she remains steady, laugh, just like Uncommon Lisa or whoever we see in her, with that smile that refuses to be pinned. Maybe that said, the final magic of it, it doesn't demand attention, it waits quietly. So for us to lean in, to look closer, to let ourselves be drawn into its world. Dingles' hands are gone now, his workshop dust, his notebooks faded, but in every brushstroke, in every layer of glaze, in every shift of that smile, he's still there. Laugh just like uncurious patient wonder. And when we look at her, we're not just looking at a painting, we're looking at a legacy of slow work, of careful observation, of the courage to ask questions and never stop wondering. So maybe that's how we should leave her. Laugh like just uncoil with a quiet glance, a soft smile, a sense that some things are worth waiting for, worth studying, worth loving, even after 500 years.